We never thought of them as gods. That is the first thing you must understand. We did not worship them. They offered no paradise, no enlightenment, no grand purpose. They offered order. And for a time that was enough, more than enough. It was a relief. Their arrival was not a war. It was a presentation, a statement of fact, a set of boundaries drawn in the cold, immutable ink of physics far beyond our own. They stood, or rather, their manifestations hovered in our capitals, and they spoke not to our leaders, but to our species. The message was translated perfectly, devoid of emotion, a sonic blueprint for our future. They were the architects, a name we gave them, for they had built the framework of what they called the stable galactic neighborhood. Their rules were not suggestions. They were the foundational code of a reality they had curated. And we, a noisy, burgeoning, fractious species, had been flagged as a potential source of instability. So they integrated us, gently, irrevocably. The first rule, the threshold of annihilation. No weapon may be built that can erase a planetary biosphere. This was not a ban on nuclear fission. That, to them, was a child's sparkler. They spoke of singularity drives misaligned, of antimatter seeds, of quantum plasma weapons that could unmake a world's atomic cohesion. We thought it merciful, a ban on our own worst demons. We decommissioned our stockpiles. We felt for a generation a species-wide exhalation. The Great Terror was over. They had saved us from ourselves. The second rule, the velocity ceiling. No vessel may traverse the void at a speed that collapses causality. Faster than light travel, as we dreamed of it, was a crude and dangerous tool. It created paradoxes. It frayed the fabric they had so carefully woven. They gave us the gates, beautiful, swirling rings of silver light anchored in the void between Mars and Jupiter. You could journey to 100 star systems, but only along their preset channels, only to the worlds they had deemed suitable. The journeys took predictable, manageable intervals. There were no shortcuts, no wild frontiers. The universe became a subway map. The third rule, the emotional quotient. This one was never stated outright. It was inferred, observed. Societies that exhibited collective emotional spikes, widespread panic, revolutionary fervor, ecstatic religious movements, were visited by silent, smooth ships that would hover above population centers. A soft amber light would pulse, and the spike would dampen. A collective sigh would follow, a forgetting, a return to calm. The architects valued calm above all else. They called it cognitive sustainability. We learned to temper our joys, our griefs, our rages. Art became muted. Music sought harmonies that soothed, never challenged. Love was a quiet bond, not a tempest. The fourth rule, the technological shelf. We could innovate, but only within their lanes. Nano-assembly for building? Approved. Medical nanites to eradicate disease? Approved. Self-replicating nanotechnology? Forbidden. Artificial general intelligence? Forbidden. They explained, with the patience of a physicist lecturing a toddler, that true creative AI was not a tool. It was a new species. And introducing a new species without oversight was the height of instability. Our computers remained vast, but stupid. They were tools, not partners. We stopped dreaming of silicon mines. The fifth and most subtle rule, the aesthetic of limitation. Our structures could not aspire to the planetary, the stellar. No Dyson swarms, no ring worlds, no great works that shouted a species' ambition across the light years. Architecture, on Earth and on our colonies, leaned toward the organic, the integrated, the humble. We built into mountainsides, under oceans, within forests. To scrape the sky with a spire of ego was considered dissonant, a visual pollution in their stable neighborhood. For generations we lived by these rules. A golden age, some called it. No poverty, no war, no existential fear. The architects were rarely seen. Their probes, smooth and silent as stones, monitored the gates. Their communications were infrequent, administrative. They were the ultimate civil servants of the cosmos, and we were their well-tended garden. But a garden is a prison for anything that dreams of being a forest. The pressure did not feel like oppression. It felt like a low-grade headache that became the background hum of existence. It was the sigh of an engineer, her design for a more efficient reactor rejected because its theoretical maximum output brushed against the threshold of annihilation. It was the blank look in a poet's eyes as she tried to capture a feeling that was deemed too intense, too spiky for safe consumption. It was the pilot, staring at the preset course on his screen, the gate looming ahead, and wondering what lay in the darkness between the designated stops. It was the quiet humiliation of a child asking, "What did we build?" and having no answer that didn't include the words, "They allowed us to." The rage did not boil. It tectonic. It shifted in deep, silent chambers of the collective human psyche. It cooled into something harder than anger. It became a calculus. The architects, in their endless pursuit of stability, had made one critical, beautiful error. They assumed their rules were enforced by their technology, by their monitoring, by their overwhelming power. They did not understand that the rules were ultimately enforced by human belief, by our acceptance. The moment we truly, fundamentally stopped believing in the validity of their boundaries, the rules became suggestions, written in invisible ink. The turning point was not a battle, it was an audit, a routine architectural submission for a new research facility on Pluto. The humans submitted the plans, as per protocol. The architect's review system, an ancient, patient algorithm, scanned them. The facility was for cosmological observation, its power draw was minimal, its purpose peaceful. Approval was granted. The architects did not look deeper. They saw no weapon. They saw no violation of the velocity ceiling. The structure was humble, buried in the nitrogen ice. Why would they look? Humans complied. Humans always complied. The facility was not a telescope. It was a loom. For centuries, in scattered, isolated labs, in simulation environments buried under false data, in the quiet minds of theorists who had learned to think in ways the architects never scanned for, humanity had been working on a single problem. Not a weapon, not a starship. A simpler, more fundamental concept. A stitch. The architects' stable neighborhood was a tapestry. Their rules were the warp and weft. The gates were not just conduits, they were anchoring points, knots in that cosmic fabric. The humans on Pluto began to weave a new thread, a thread of controlled, resonant space-time, using principles the architects had forbidden not because they were dangerous, but because they were messy. They were the tools of creation, not curation. They powered the loom. It drew energy not from reactors, but from the latent quantum foam of the Pluto-Charon orbital resonance, a whisper of power, a needle slipping into the fabric of reality. In a chamber on Pluto, a space 1 meter square ceased to obey local causality. It did not move, it did not glow, it simply was elsewhere. And then it was back. A stitch, a tiny, perfect violation of the rule that said all travel must go through the gates. No alarms sounded. The architect's sensors were calibrated for the brute force violation, for the screaming rip of an FTL drive. They were not calibrated for this delicate surgical needlepoint. They noticed nothing. A week later, a research station on a moon of Proxima Centauri, 11 light-years away, reported a successful reception. A data packet containing a single prime number had appeared in an identical chamber. It had not traveled. It had been instantiated. The loom had not sent it. The loom had aligned 2 points. It had made them congruent. The universe did not tremble. The architects did not come. The rules had been broken, and nothing happened. That was the most terrifying moment, the moment of absolute silent freedom. It was the moment a child realizes the fence was never electrified. Then, methodically, quietly, humanity began to fold the universe. The second loom was built inside an asteroid. The third, woven into the superstructure of a generation ship that had, ostensibly, been launched on a gate-sanctioned, millennia-long voyage to nowhere. Each new loom was smaller, more efficient. They were not ships, they were doors. And humanity was learning that if you can create a door, you can also create a lock. The architects noticed an anomaly, a gravitational signature, faint and fleeting, from the vicinity of Pluto. It was asymmetrical, a tiny pucker in the smooth fabric. They dispatched a probe, a smooth silver teardrop that slipped out of a gate and glided towards the icy dwarf planet. By the time it arrived, the Pluto facility was a hollowed-out shell. The loom was gone, dismantled, its components scattered across 100 asteroids, now sliding silently through the Oort cloud. All the probe found was the hum of background radiation and a single, human-made object sitting in the exact center of the main chamber. It was a stone cube, perfectly smooth. On one face, etched with a laser, was a mathematical notation, an equation. It was not a message of defiance, it was a correction to a foundational formula the architects used for local space-time calibration. The human equation was more elegant, more efficient. It was not a declaration of war, it was a peer review. The probe took the cube and returned through the gate. We can only imagine the silence in which it was presented. The architects, beings of logic and order, would have examined it. They would have run the equation. They would have seen its undeniable truth. And in that truth, they would have seen the terrifying implication. We understand your fabric, and we are improving it. Their next communication was not to our governments. It was a general broadcast, on all channels, in all languages. The voice was the same as the first day, but for the first time there was a frequency beneath it, a resonance we had never heard. It was not anger, it was confusion. You have altered prescribed geometries. The statement hung in the air. This is a violation of the stability accords. Cease and desist. Dismantle your anomalous constructs. Submit to inspection. Humanity sent a reply. From 1,000 looms, now humming in hidden places, the same message was echoed back, not in words, but in a compressed data burst. It contained the schematics for a simple device, a stabilizing rod based on their own new equation. It was a gift, an improvement to their own gate network, an increase of efficiency by 0.003%. The message was clear. We are not throwing rocks at your fence, we are recrafting the wire, and our alloy is superior. The architect's confusion curdled into something cold and sharp. For the first time in their long history of stewarding younger species, the paradigm had shifted. They were not dealing with disobedient children, they were dealing with colleagues who had rejected their thesis. They acted as they always had. They sought to apply a damping field, a massive, gentle pulse of cognitive energy designed to soothe the spike of human rebellion. Ships the size of continents slid into the solar system, their surfaces shimmering with the soft, amber light of enforced calm. The pulse washed over Earth, over Mars, over the colonies, and dissipated, like a wave hitting a seawall. Humanity had, quietly and without fanfare, years before, woven a subtle counter-resonance into the looms, a psychic baffle. We had not shielded ourselves with force. We had shielded ourselves with a more complete understanding of the very emotional physics the architects wielded. We let the pulse in, and then we harmonized it, neutralized it into a faint background hum, a distant memory of being told to relax. On Earth, people looked up. They felt the pressure, the ancient familiar pressure to submit, to be calm, to obey. And for the first time, they felt it slide off. They felt their own inner spike, their fear, their hope, their fierce and terrible will remain intact, undampened. It was the most profound sensation in human history. It was the feeling of a numbed limb roaring back to life, agony and ecstasy in one. The architects' ships hung in the void, silent. They had no protocol for this. Their ultimate tool of gentle control had failed. Then, humanity performed its first truly irrevocable act. We did not fire a weapon, we closed a door. At the time, a vast human colony vessel, the Echo of Sol, was midway through a gate transit from the Sirius system. It was a behemoth, 10 million souls in cryosleep, following the sanctioned path. As it passed the event horizon of the gate, the human operators on a hidden loom, nestled in the crust of a dead moon, enacted a new sequence. They did not attack the gate. They edited it. For a picosecond, the gate's internal geometry was aligned not to its paired destination, but to a coordinate in deep intergalactic space. A void so empty it would take the Echo 100,000 years to reach the nearest star at sublight speed. The Echo of Sol vanished from the Sirius gate and did not reappear at the Procyon gate. It was gone, rerouted, not destroyed, lost. A moment later, the gates reset. They functioned perfectly. But the event was logged. The architects saw it. They traced the interference to the human loom network. They understood the message, colder and clearer than any weapon. You built the roads. We have learned to change the signs. This was the violation that broke their logic. This was not rebellion. It was sovereignty. A declaration that human fate was no longer theirs to steward. The architect's response was swift, and for the first time, violent. Not with planet-cracking beams, for that violated their own first rule, but with precision, a surgical strike. They targeted the looms. Their ships, weapons that manipulated gravity itself, reached into the asteroids, the moon bases, the hidden stations. They crushed them. Not with explosions, but with implosions. The structures folded into singularities the size of marbles and then evaporated in a flash of Hawking radiation. Dozens of looms, hundreds of years of secret work, erased. Humanity watched. We offered no military response. We launched no counterattack. We simply recorded the locations. We noted the signatures of their weapons. We studied the way they folded space-time to destroy. And we learned. The war, such as it was, lasted 7 days. It was a silent war of creation and deletion. They would find a loom and delete it. We would build 3 more, smaller, more cleverly hidden, using the data from their deletions to improve the design. Our looms were no longer just for communication or travel. They were becoming something else. On the 7th day, the architects made a decision. They would apply a quarantine. They would sever our solar system from the gate network, isolate us, let us stew in our own instability until we begged for reintegration. It was a logical, calm, controlled response. They sent the command to the primary solar gate, the great ring between Mars and Jupiter. The command was a master key, a sequence that would put the gate into dormant lockdown for 10,000 years. The command was received, the gate acknowledged, and then it rejected the lockdown. The architects sent it again, rejection. They investigated, and in the gate's core programming, they found a new layer of code, elegant, efficient, human. It was a voting protocol. The gate would now only accept commands ratified by a cryptographic key held by a majority of the hidden human looms. The gates, their gates, no longer answered to them. They answered to a distributed human consensus. The silent panic that then flowed through the architect collective is a thing we can only theorize. But we saw its physical manifestation. Their vast ships, which had hung with such immutable grace, began to move with abrupt, sharp vectors. For the first time they looked like things that were agitated. Their final communication was not a broadcast. It was a tight beam transmission directed at Earth. It contained no words, just an image, a simulation. It showed the Milky Way galaxy, its spiral arms bright with stars. Then it showed our new loom network, a web of golden light spreading from our solar system. As it spread, the simulation projected forward in time. The web grew, connecting star to star, not through gates, but through direct congruence. It was faster, more efficient than their system, and as it grew, it began to alter the very gravitational constants of the space it touched. Gently, minutely, the simulation sped up. The web encompassed the galaxy, and the galaxy changed. Its spiral arms tightened, its rotations sped up by a fraction of a percent. New stars flared to life in its core. The simulation was not a threat of destruction. It was a forecast of alteration, of a galaxy remade, stitch by stitch, into a shape more pleasing to its new weavers. A shape incompatible with architect technology, with their biology, with their very existence. The implication was clear. We were not just breaking rules, we were rewriting the canvas. And in the new painting, there was no place for the old curators. They gave us one final choice, a single, stark, binary option. A data packet containing a kill switch for the loom network. If we activated it, all would be forgiven. The gates would be restored to their control. The stability would resume. We would return to our garden. Or we could continue, and they would be forced to enact the final sanction. A thing so terrible, so contrary to all their principles, it had no name. It was the erasure of a threat to the stable neighborhood at its source. They would not crack our planet. They would unknit it. They would use a weapon they had banned at the dawn of their civilization, violating their own first rule to preserve the principle behind it. The message ended. There was no debate on Earth, no grand vote. The silence that followed was the silence of a species that had already made its choice, long ago in the dark, while following the rules. It was the silence of the loom operators, fingers hovering over their controls. It was the silence of 10 billion people looking up at the night sky, not with fear, but with a terrible, quiet ownership. We did not send a reply. We activated the next sequence. Across the solar system, the remaining looms, thousands of them, tiny things hidden in comet clouds, in the atmospheres of gas giants, in the hearts of forgotten asteroids, powered up in unison. They did not aim at the architect ships, they aimed at each other. They began to weave a single, vast, intricate pattern centered on our sun. The architects detected the energy build-up. They saw the pattern forming. It was not a weapon, it was a cocoon. They realized too late our ultimate act of non-compliance. We were not going to fight them for control of the galaxy, we were going to leave it. The final sanction was authorized. From the largest architect ship, a device was activated. A dark sphere, small as a marble, was launched towards Earth. It fell, not with speed, but with a terrible, inevitable gravity. As it fell, it began to unravel the world, not into pieces, but into strings. The very quantum information that constituted matter, space and time around our planet began to decohere. The sky above the marble turned into a storm of non-color, a screaming nullity of unmade physics. It reached the upper atmosphere and stopped. The cocoon was complete. The looms had woven a shell of redefined space-time around our entire solar system. A reality where the laws were just different, where the architect weapon, based on their laws, could not function. The dark sphere hovered at the boundary, straining against a physics that no longer acknowledged its principles. It flickered, and, like a mirage, it faded away. Outside the cocoon, the architects watched. Their sensors saw our sun, our planets, but the light was redshifted, strange. They could see in, but they could no longer touch. They could no longer interact. We had not destroyed them, we had simply stepped sideways. We had folded ourselves a new room in the house of the universe, and we had closed the door. The last thing they saw, before the light from our new reality ceased to make sense to their instruments, was the slow, silent dismantling of the solar gate by a swarm of human-built drones. We were taking apart their front porch. We would use the materials to build something else. That was the day humans stopped following alien rules. There was no victory cheer, no celebration. Inside the cocoon, the silence was absolute. The stars in the night sky had shifted. They were no longer points of light, but smears of strange color. The physics were new, untested. We had traded a gilded cage for an infinite, terrifying wilderness of our own making. We don't know what happened to the architects. Perhaps they guard the outside of our cocoon still, watching for a crack. Perhaps they left to apply new, stricter rules to other species, their faith in gentle stewardship shattered. Or perhaps they are unraveling, their perfect stability forever punctured by the memory of the quiet, patient species that chose to knit its own madness rather than live in their sane, beautiful prison. We are alone now. Truly alone, not in space, but in law. We write the laws now. We decide what is real. The cost is everything we knew. The cost is the universe we were born into. The Loom network hums in the background of our new reality, a constant low thrum. It is the sound of our will. It is the sound of the cage door swinging shut from the inside. We are free. And we will never know peace again.